A simple woman arrives at the range, Part 1. The sun was already punishing by mid-morning. Heat waves shimmered over the concrete as if reality itself was warping. The military range, usually reserved for tactical drills and occasional demonstrations, was unusually busy. A fresh group of cadets had arrived that week, some wide-eyed, some cocky, all eager to prove themselves. The sound of gunfire echoed in the air, rhythmic and sharp, followed by the smell of cordite and dust. At the far end of the range, near the check-in point, a woman approached. She wasn't the kind of person anyone expected to see here. In a place defined by high-performance gear, military precision, and sharp uniforms, she stood out like a single quiet note in the middle of a thunderous march. She wore plain jeans, scuffed boots, and a faded olive-green t-shirt. Her hair, streaked with gray, was tied back in a no-nonsense ponytail. Her face was tanned, marked with the fine lines of time and sun, unbothered by makeup or expression. She carried a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. It looked old, like something passed down through generations, worn at the corners but clearly well taken care of. No one greeted her. No one offered help. In fact, most people didn't know what to make of her. Some of the younger cadets exchanged glances, their expressions dripping with quiet amusement. A few smirked openly. They didn't say anything at first, but the message in their eyes was clear. What's she doing here? The woman walked to the range's registration point, where a bored-looking clerk was sitting behind a reinforced glass window. He barely looked up as she approached. "Name?" he asked. She slid her ID card through the opening without a word. He glanced down, then blinked. There was a long pause. You sure you're at the right place, ma'am?" he asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. "I am," she said simply. The clerk squinted at the ID again. It was military issue, real and valid, but so old that it looked like it belonged in a museum. The expiration date had long passed, but the system still flagged it as having permanent clearance. He handed it back silently and waved her through. The woman stepped onto the shooting line, selecting a lane at the far edge. She unpacked her gear slowly and methodically. Inside her bag, a sidearm, clean, well-maintained, but not one of the sleek, modern models others around her were using. This was older, functional, proven. Beside it, a few boxes of ammunition, protective glasses, and ear protection. No fancy optics, no custom grips, no digital enhancements, just skill and silence. As she set up, a group of cadets nearby started whispering. "Yo, who let Grandma in here?" One of them chuckled. "Must be lost," another said. "Maybe she thinks this is a yoga class." Laughter followed. Not loud, but not subtle either. She heard it. She didn't react, not even a glance in their direction. That bothered them more than they expected. They were used to pushing buttons, getting reactions. The lack of one made her more of a mystery, and mysteries made people uncomfortable. Meanwhile, she adjusted her stance, tested her grip, and loaded her weapon. The range officer nearby gave her a half-second glance, raised an eyebrow, then turned away. He had more important things to worry about. A simple woman arrives at the range, Part 2. The distant pops of gunfire cracked like metronomes, echoing off the concrete barriers and metal targets. Shell casings bounced and scattered at the feet of the cadets, their hands jittering with adrenaline and inexperience. For most of them, it was their third or fourth day on the range. Not enough time to get good, but just enough to get cocky. The woman at the far lane continued setting up, as if in slow motion. Each action was precise. Ammo unboxed and stacked neatly, ear protection adjusted without haste, a small cloth laid out to wipe down her firearm between rounds. There was no rush in her movements, and no wasted energy either. She carried herself like someone who had done this not once, not twice, but thousands of times, without fanfare. Cadet Rios, one of the younger men nearby, had been watching her with growing curiosity. He nudged his buddy Connors. "Yo," Rios said under his breath. "She hasn't even loaded yet. What's she doing?" Connors, older by maybe 2 years and desperate to prove he belonged, snorted. "Trying to remember what end the bullets come out of, probably." A few others chuckled. But still, the woman didn't respond. She didn't even glance at them. Her entire focus remained on her gear, not nervously, not distractedly, but with a strange calm that made her seem detached from the rest of the noise, like she was in her own world, one made of process and purpose. "Bet she doesn't hit a single target," Connors muttered, loud enough that even a few range officers gave him a look. That was when Sergeant Maynard walked by. A former drill instructor turned range supervisor, Maynard didn't tolerate much nonsense. A no-bull, steel-jawed veteran with a voice that could freeze blood, he stopped behind Connors and crossed his arms. "Something funny, Cadet?" he asked. Connors immediately stiffened. "No, Sergeant." "You're mocking a shooter who hasn't even drawn yet," Maynard said. "Do you know her file?" "No, Sergeant." "Then keep your mouth shut and eyes open." Connors flushed, biting down his pride, but said nothing else. Sergeant Maynard turned his head slightly, just enough to look downrange toward the woman. For a brief moment, his expression shifted. Curious, maybe, or reflective. He didn't say anything to her, but he lingered longer than usual before walking off. The woman finally stood. Her stance was textbook perfect. Feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent. Arms out, elbows relaxed. She looked down the sightline with quiet focus, breathing slow, steady. She hadn't fired a single shot yet, but everything about her posture radiated control. No wasted motion, no extra tension, just readiness. One of the younger cadets scoffed. "Come on, it's not that serious." But another one, a girl named Patel, whispered, "Wait, look at her grip. That's not beginner stuff." Rio squinted. "Yeah, that's real training." The mood began to shift, slowly and subtly. The laughter died down. Curiosity replaced arrogance. The range had dozens of shooters, but eyes were beginning to drift toward that far booth. Not everyone knew why they were watching, just that they were. A strange, expectant quiet began to form in the space between shots. The woman lifted the gun, cocked the slide, and paused. Her finger hovered over the trigger. And then she stopped. She turned slightly, just enough to glance at her right, where the mocking cadets were. She didn't glare. She didn't sneer. Her eyes were calm, flat even, like still water. There was no expression behind them, and somehow that made her presence feel heavier, more real. She didn't say a word. Then she turned back toward the target. Click. She flipped off the safety. The stillness before the shot was almost reverent. Somewhere behind her, a bottle rolled off a table, but even that didn't pull her focus. And then, bang! A simple woman arrives at the range. Part 3. Bang! The first shot cracked through the humid morning air like a sudden thunderclap, louder than anyone expected. But it wasn't just the sound that caught their attention. It was the sound followed by the unmistakable ping of metal being struck dead center. The target, a standard steel silhouette set at 25 yards, vibrated briefly before settling again. One shot. Bullseye. The woman didn't flinch. She didn't lower her weapon or celebrate the hit. She simply recalibrated her stance with the smallest shift of her shoulder and exhaled. Bang! Another hit, slightly higher, but still center mass. A 2-inch group forming already. She moved with robotic control, but there was nothing mechanical about her. It was more like instinct. Flow, precision earned through 1,000 repetitions, her grip, her recoil recovery, her breathing, all in perfect sync. The type of discipline that can't be taught in a week, a month, or even a year. This was different. This was embedded. By the third shot, the atmosphere on the range had completely changed. No one was laughing now. Even Connors, whose earlier mocking had drawn Sergeant Maynard's attention, had stopped mid-conversation, jaw slack. He turned his head slowly, watching each movement of the woman as though witnessing something he couldn't yet explain. Bang. Fourth shot. Tight grouping. Center mass again. She reloaded without looking down, her hands moving with the fluidity of muscle memory. Not a second wasted. The way she chambered the next round, adjusted her foot placement, and resumed position. All of it carried the kind of unteachable confidence that only comes from years in the field. Cadet Patel spoke softly, like she didn't want to break a spell. "She's not just good. She's elite," Rios whispered, finishing the sentence. None of them had ever seen anything like it. Not from an instructor, not from a visiting officer, not from anyone. The woman continued shooting. 10 rounds, then 15, then 20. Every shot landed within a tight cluster on the target. Not a single one strayed outside the designated kill zone. The steel plates rang like bells under the weight of her accuracy. Someone further down the line lowered their weapon just to watch. A few instructors had begun whispering to one another. Not even the range officers, usually focused on safety protocols and logistics, could ignore her now. Eyes started tracking from the far end of the range. Even shooters from other lanes, mid-session, paused and looked over. The rhythm of gunfire around her slowed, almost as if everyone else instinctively deferred to the one master among them. The woman never looked up, never looked around. It was as if the rest of the world had faded, and only the target remained. Each round she fired wasn't just a shot, it was a signature, an unmistakable imprint of someone who had spent entire lifetimes learning how to master their weapon, not for sport, not for show, but for survival. Her form, her focus, her flow, it wasn't competition shooting, it was battlefield efficiency. Connors finally broke the silence. "I think we messed up." No one answered him. What could they say? Meanwhile, she finished the final magazine and calmly engaged the slide lock. She inspected the barrel, wiped it down with the cloth she had placed earlier, and packed her pistol back into the bag. There was no expression on her face, no pride, no smugness, no need to acknowledge the small audience now frozen in awe around her. She just did her work and began putting her gear away like she'd done it 1,000 times before. As she zipped the canvas bag, a gust of wind blew through the range and lifted her shirt collar slightly. Just a moment. Just enough. And that's when the SEAL commander saw it. From across the range, Commander Jensen, a tall, hard-featured man known for never showing surprise, stopped mid-step. He had just walked out of the control shed, clipboard in hand, prepared to inspect the next group of cadets. But then he saw it. The tattoo. Just above the woman's right shoulder blade, partially revealed beneath the shifting fabric, was a faded, black ink insignia. Small, circular, clean. To most, it would look like some old tribal or symbolic art, but not to Jensen. He recognized it instantly. His clipboard fell, unnoticed, to the ground. A Simple Woman Arrives at the Range, Part 4. The clipboard hit the gravel with a muted clack, but Commander Jensen didn't even blink. His eyes were fixed on the insignia peeking from under the woman's collar, an inked symbol small enough to miss, but unmistakable to the few who knew what it truly meant. To the untrained eye, it looked like an abstract geometric swirl with wings wrapping around a single star. But Jensen had seen it before. Once, and never forgotten it. He stood frozen at the edge of the range, unmoving, as his mind yanked him backward through layers of memory. operations he wasn't supposed to talk about, missions buried under top clearance files, and names erased from rosters to protect identities. That tattoo, it wasn't just a symbol. It was a ghost from a Black Ops unit so secret it wasn't listed in the Pentagon database. Not Delta, not DevGru, not CIA SOG. This was something deeper, older. A pre-September 11th Cold War era. Experimental recon and elimination team that answered only to direct executive orders. Half of what they did was off-grid, off-books, and completely deniable. Most military personnel never even heard rumors about it. And that woman was wearing its insignia. Jensen's breath left him in a slow exhale. His jaw clenched as he stepped forward, one heavy boot after the next, drawn by something between shock and reverence. He didn't walk like a commander. He walked like a man approaching a legend. The cadets didn't notice him at first. They were still watching the woman pack her things, slow, deliberate, focused. The kind of movements only people with a lifelong relationship to discipline could make. Rios saw the commander first. Guys? Connors turned and blinked. Wait, he's coming here. Commander Jensen walked right past the line of cadets without acknowledging them. No nod, no glance. His eyes never left the woman. She hadn't noticed him yet, or if she had, she was ignoring him. He stopped 4 feet from her lane. The air thickened around him. His voice, when it came, was lower than usual. Quieter. As if speaking at full volume would be disrespectful. Where did you get that tattoo? The range went still. The few nearby officers and instructors who heard the question stopped what they were doing, immediately alert. The woman paused in mid-motion, then finally stood upright and turned to face him. Her expression was unreadable, eyes calm and distant, like she was calculating something, perhaps whether to speak at all. She glanced at his name tag. "Commander Jensen," she said. Not a question, a statement. SEAL Team 4, served in Kabul. Operation Canyon Vulture. Icon Sibnyon. His breath caught. "How do you—" She raised a hand to cut him off. "Not important," she said flatly. Then she took one step forward and reached back with her hand, pulling the collar of her shirt down to reveal the full tattoo. The silence on the range now felt suffocating. Jensen stared, unmoving. Every cadet, every instructor, every wandering range officer had fallen still, drawn into the gravity of a moment they didn't understand. He swallowed hard. "You were Ghost Viper, weren't you?" The woman's lips quirked into the smallest ghost of a smile. Not a full one, just a shadow of recognition. "I was." Jensen's face shifted. The tight discipline cracked, just for a breath, not in fear, but in awe. Then he did something none of the cadets could comprehend. He straightened his spine and saluted her. A full, formal, unblinking salute. No smirk, no sarcasm, no confusion. The kind of salute reserved for people who outrank you in experience, in sacrifice, and in legacy. The cadets behind him stood frozen. Connor's mouth opened slightly. Rios looked between the commander and the woman like he'd just walked into the middle of a military myth come to life. The woman held his gaze for a few seconds. Then she nodded, not in arrogance, but in acknowledgement. A simple gesture between warriors who had walked the same hells, though never side by side. "I retired 15 years ago," she said. "Didn't think I'd be recognized." Jensen shook his head slowly. "People like you don't retire. You just go quiet." She gave a soft shrug. "I prefer quiet." By now, even the instructors had stopped all sessions. Shooters were lowering their weapons. Conversations died off. All eyes on this simple woman with a faded tattoo who, just an hour ago, had been written off as a joke. And now, Even the top-ranked commander on site had rendered her full military honor. A simple woman arrives at the range. Part 5. The salute held for a long moment, not just a standard gesture, but one thick with unspoken meaning. Every detail, Jensen's posture, the way his eyes didn't blink, the slight tremble in his jaw, said everything words couldn't. Not about rank, not even about duty, but about respect. Deep, hard-earned, no questions asked respect. And the woman? She didn't smile. She didn't offer a witty comeback or revel in the attention. She simply nodded, returned the gesture with a short, disciplined hand-to-heart motion, then turned away and resumed packing her gear. The entire range had gone silent. No gunshots, no chatter, no movement. For the first time that day, even the cocky cadets had nothing to say. Commander Jensen slowly lowered his salute and took a step back. His face had shifted into something that could almost be described as haunted. Not in fear, but in the presence of living history. There were people in this world who'd walked through hell, changed the shape of shadows, and then disappeared before history could catch their names. This woman had clearly been one of them. He turned to his junior officer beside him, who had been watching with confusion written all over his face. "File a memo to command," Jensen said quietly. "This range is now closed to the public for the next 2 hours." "Sir." "No exceptions." "Yes, sir." Jensen didn't explain himself. He didn't need to. The officers present understood. The cadets, most of them at least, would soon begin to understand too. Across the line, the woman zipped her canvas bag and slung it over her shoulder. She paused for only a second, her eyes scanning the length of the firing line, not with judgment, but with quiet assessment. Some of the cadets looked away. Others held her gaze, almost apologetically. Connors was among them, standing like a statue, no longer the smirking skeptic he had been half an hour ago. Rio stepped forward instinctively. "Ma'am," he blurted out. She stopped. His voice cracked slightly. I didn't know. We didn't know." She raised an eyebrow and looked at him with that same unreadable calm. "You didn't ask," she said, without venom, just truth. He lowered his head slightly. Were you really Ghost Viper?" Her eyes narrowed just a bit. "That name doesn't exist." He hesitated. "Right, of course." She looked at him for a long second, then glanced at the target he had been practicing on earlier. His grouping had been wide, shots pulled left and low, the kind of pattern that revealed nervous hands and poor discipline. She walked to his booth without asking and picked up his weapon. "This one's off balance," she said, almost to herself. "Trigger needs resetting." Then she handed it back to him. "Train like someone's life depends on it," she said. "Because someday, it might." He nodded mutely, not even fully processing her words yet, but knowing he would remember them forever. She gave him one last look. Not a farewell, not a lecture. Just a moment of shared understanding between soldier and student. Then, without fanfare, she turned and walked down the gravel lane, past stunned instructors and pale-faced cadets, until she stepped through the gate and disappeared into the brightness beyond the fence. No medals, no applause, just silence in her wake, and a series of targets, shredded to the center, speaking louder than any speech ever could,